The Alpha King's wolf rejected the crown, after meeting a silent child. The hall was already full when Marcus Vale walked in, and every single person inside felt him before they saw him. It was not the sound of his boots on the stone floor. It was not the way the torches flickered when the great doors opened. It was something older than that, something that lived in the blood of every wolf in that room, and it said, without words, that the man who had just entered was not someone to be tested. Marcus was 31 years old. He had led his first battle at 17. He had held the Northern Pack together, through 3 brutal winters, 2 invasions, and 1 internal uprising that had left 4 of his former council members exiled to the outer territories. He had never lost, not once. And everyone in that hall knew it. He walked to the front of the room without looking at the rows of people who parted to let him pass. His face was calm, the way a deep lake is calm. Still on the surface, but with something powerful moving underneath. He had dark hair, cut close, and gray eyes that people often described as unusual because they never seemed to change expression, even when his voice did. He was built the way a man looks when work and endurance have shaped his body, rather than vanity. Broad through the shoulders, with hands that had held swords, and also dressed wounds on younger wolves who could not do it themselves. He was not the kind of man who performed authority. He simply had it, and everyone around him adjusted themselves to that fact without being asked. The crown ceremony was 3 days away. That was the reason the hall was full tonight. The elders had called an informal gathering, what they called a gathering of alignment, which meant they wanted to speak to the pack members, remind them of the ceremony's significance, and ensure that every household understood what would be required of them, in terms of presence, conduct, and tribute. Marcus was expected to sit at the head of the table, say very little, and allow the elders to do what elders did best, which was speak at great length about things that had already been decided. He sat. Elder Gareth, the oldest of the 5 council members, rose from his seat at the far end of the table and began. Gareth was a narrow man with white hair and hands that shook slightly when he held papers, though his voice never shook. He had been on the council before Marcus's father had been Alpha, and he moved through ceremonies the way water moves through a channel, slowly, deliberately, following the shape of what was already there. 3 days from now, Gareth said, the Northern Pack will witness something that has not occurred in 37 years. The bonding of a new Alpha King to the crown is not merely a ceremony, it is a living act. It is a transfer of will between the Alpha and the oldest power this territory has ever known. The wolf who accepts the crown does not simply receive a symbol, he enters into an agreement. He makes a promise to this land, to its people, and to every wolf who has ever led this pack before him. The room was very quiet. Marcus listened. He had heard versions of this speech before, at training gatherings when he was young, at the ceremony for his father, and again at various points in his own leadership. The words were always nearly the same. He did not find them empty. He understood that ritual had a purpose, that the repetition of important words across time was one of the ways a community held itself together. But he also understood the weight of what Gareth was saying beneath the formal language, and that weight was real and significant. Accepting the crown was not a small thing. Inside him, his wolf, Kale, was quiet. Not in the relaxed way that a wolf rests after a run. Quiet in the way that something large and aware goes still when it is paying close attention to something it cannot yet name. Marcus noticed this. He had lived with Kale his entire life, and he knew the difference between a calm wolf and a watchful one. Tonight, Kale was watchful. He said nothing about it. He sat through the rest of the gathering, answered the questions that were directed at him with the patience and clarity that his pack expected, and when the meeting concluded, he walked back through the hall and out into the night air. The Northern Territory was beautiful at night, in a way that felt almost aggressive, like it was daring you to stay soft in the face of it. The sky was very dark and very clear, and the stars were so numerous and bright that they seemed to have weight. The trees at the edge of the settlement were old and tall, and the wind moved through them with a sound that Marcus had grown up hearing, and still found deeply settling. He breathed in. The cold air was sharp with pine, and with something else, something mineral and clean, that he had never found words for. Kale moved inside him, not a nudge, not a direction, just a presence, like a breath. Marcus stood at the edge of the settlement for a long time, and let the night be what it was. He thought about the crown. The physical object was kept in a sealed room in the Elders' Hall. a room that Marcus had never entered, because Alpha Kings only entered it once, on the day of their bonding. He had been told what the crown looked like. Silver, they said, but not the polished kind. Old silver, the kind that had darkened at its edges and looked almost like stone in low light. It had been worn by every Alpha King of the Northern Pack for as far back as any record reached. The oldest elders spoke about it with a kind of reverence that went beyond respect, something closer to awe, and beneath the awe, something Marcus had never been able to name. He had always assumed the feeling was simply the weight of history. That was reason enough for reverence, but tonight, with Cale so unusually still inside him, he found himself wondering if there was something else. He went to bed. He slept without dreaming. In the morning, he rose before light and went out to run. Running was not something Marcus did for fitness, though it kept him strong. He ran because it was the one time each day when his mind and Cale's instincts aligned completely, when the distance between thinking and feeling collapsed, and he was simply a moving body in a world that asked nothing of him but forward motion. He ran south along the tree line, and then east where the ground rose, and the trees thinned, and the view opened up over the valley below. He stopped at the top of the rise, and stood there breathing, looking out over the land. It was his land. He felt that not with pride, but with something quieter, a kind of responsibility that sat in his chest like a stone, not heavy in a bad way, but heavy in the way of something real and permanent. He had been given this land, or rather, he had been born into the chain of people who had held it, and now it was his turn to hold it. 3 days from now, that holding would be made formal in a way that could not be unmade. He turned back toward the settlement and ran home. That afternoon, a dispute came to his attention between two household heads in the western quarter over the rights to a stretch of river. Marcus sat with both men for 2 hours, listened to each of them with the full attention that had always been his strongest quality as a leader, and then made a decision that was fair, and that both men, even the one who received the smaller portion, could live with. He did not explain his reasoning at great length. He simply stated it clearly, answered the follow-up questions, and closed the meeting. After that, he met with his head warrior, a man named Owen who had served under Marcus's father before serving under Marcus, and they reviewed the security arrangements for the ceremony. The ceremony would draw visitors from 3 allied packs, and while none of these packs were hostile, Marcus preferred to have a clear plan. Owen walked him through the positions, the timing, and the protocols for any unexpected arrival. Marcus approved everything except one detail, which he changed, and Owen accepted the change without argument, because Marcus's instincts in matters of safety had never been wrong. The evening was quieter. Marcus ate alone, which was not unusual for him. He was not an unfriendly man, but he was also not someone who sought company for its own sake. He could sit in a room full of people and feel entirely contained within himself, and he could sit alone and feel no particular pull toward company. This was not coldness. The people who knew him well understood the difference between a man who did not reach out and a man who did not care. Marcus cared deeply about his pack. He simply did not need to perform that caring in the ordinary social ways. He was almost finished eating when one of his younger guards, a boy named Finn, who was 16 and still learning how to carry himself in his uniform, appeared in the doorway. "There's something you should know about," Finn said, and then hesitated. Marcus put down his fork. "Then say it." "One of the kitchen staff saw a child near the restricted forest boundary this morning. A small girl. She came back at midday, and she was closer this time." Finn paused. "It's the orphan, sir. The one they call the quiet one." Marcus was still for a moment. "She crossed the boundary?" "Not quite. She was at the edge. But she didn't leave when the kitchen staff called out to her. She just looked at them and then walked back into the trees." Marcus did not respond immediately. He looked at the window for a moment, then back at Finn. "Thank you," he said. "That's all." Finn left. Marcus sat for a while with the information, which was not, in itself, alarming. Children occasionally wandered. The restricted forest was not inherently dangerous. It was restricted because it bordered territory that had once been disputed, and because the Alpha's ancestral grounds were within it. A child going near it was a minor matter. He would check the boundary in the morning, make sure it was clearly marked, and mention it to the household that was responsible for the orphan's care. Cale stirred. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Marcus knew it. He felt his wolf shift from watchful stillness into something he could only describe as attention, the way a wolf lifts its head when it has caught a scent it wants to follow. Not alarm, Not aggression. Pure, clean, focused interest. Marcus did not know why. He went to bed again, and again he did not dream. He was up before first light, and he went to the restricted forest. He told himself it was routine, that he went there to check the boundary markers as he had said he would. This was true, but he also knew, as he walked toward the tree line in the gray pre-dawn light, that Cale was pulling him forward with that same focused, quiet interest from the night before. He followed it. He had learned long ago not to argue with his wolf when Cale was this certain. He entered the forest and moved between the old trees, following the path he had walked hundreds of times. The ground was soft with pine needles and damp with the night's dew. Birds were just beginning in the branches above him, small sounds, tentative, like the day was still deciding whether to begin. He walked for perhaps 10 minutes before he heard something. It was not a voice. It was a sound so small that most people would have missed it entirely. A low, faint sound, something between a breath and a whimper, very close to the ground. He stopped and turned toward it. In the space between two of the oldest trees on the path, where the roots rose up from the earth in great curved arcs, there was a small hollow at ground level. Tucked into that hollow, curled on its side, was a young wolf pup. It was very small, too small to be away from its mother, and it was breathing in the shallow, effortful way that meant it was not well. Its fur was gray, almost silver, and its eyes were closed. Crouching beside the pup, with her small hands resting gently on its side, was a girl. She was perhaps 7 years old, perhaps a little younger. She had dark hair that had not been properly brushed, and was wearing clothes that were clean but too large for her frame, a coat that came down past her knees, boots that were clearly borrowed. She was sitting cross-legged on the cold ground with the kind of careful stillness that children only manage when they are completely absorbed in something. Her hands were on the pup, and she was very gently, very slowly moving them in small circles, as though she were trying to warm the creature through the pressure of her palms. She heard Marcus. He knew she did, because her hands stopped moving for exactly 1 moment, and then started again. She did not turn. She did not run. She did not make any sound. Marcus stood very still. Cale went absolutely motionless inside him, not with tension, but with something that felt, impossibly, like recognition, as though his wolf had been waiting for this precise moment, and was now simply present in it, fully, and without question. He looked at the pup. He looked at the way her small hands moved with confidence and gentleness on the animal's side, and he felt something move through him that he did not have a ready name for. He stood there for a long time. Finally, he crouched down so that he was at her level, though still a few feet away. "Is it going to be all right?" he asked. His voice was quiet, not soft, in the way people make their voices soft for children, performing gentleness they do not feel. Just quiet, because the moment asked for quiet. The girl did not answer. She did not look at him. Her hands continued their slow, careful movement on the pup's side. Marcus waited. He was a patient man. He did not repeat the question. After what must have been 3 or 4 minutes, the girl lifted her chin slightly, and Marcus saw her face in profile, serious and still, with eyes that were looking at the pup the way a person looks at something they intend to save. Then, without turning her head toward him, she gave one small nod. Marcus believed her. He stayed for a few minutes more, watching the pup's breathing, which did seem, very slowly, to be evening out. Then he rose and walked back to the settlement. He asked about her that morning. Her name was Lena. She had come to the pack 14 months ago, brought by a welfare runner from a southern border territory where a small family group had been caught in a conflict between 2 rival packs. The family had not survived. Lena had been found hiding in a hollow tree, alone, unhurt in her body, but unreachable in every other way. She had not spoken since the night it happened. Not one word, not one sound. The healer who had first examined her said there was nothing physically wrong with her voice. The silence, she said, was the child's answer to what she had witnessed. The pack had given her shelter in one of the household units. She ate, she slept, she moved through the settlement like a small ghost, present but not quite part of anything. She helped in the garden, in the kitchen, with the animals. She was cooperative and obedient, and entirely unreachable. No one had managed to get her to speak. Several people had tried. A few had pushed harder than was kind, and the result had always been the same. Lena simply waited for them to finish, and then went back to being silent. The people of the pack called her the quiet one. They were not unkind when they said it, but they had also largely stopped trying. Marcus sat with this information through the rest of the morning. He thought about the way her hands had moved on the pup's side, not frantically, not experimentally, but with the calm certainty of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. He thought about the way she had not run when she heard him. He thought about the small nod. He had known many people in his life who used words to say nothing, and he had known a few who said everything without using them at all. He understood, with a clarity that surprised him, which kind of person Lena was. Cale turned slowly inside him, like a wolf settling into a new position. Not restless, not urgent, just present in a new way, alert in a direction Marcus had not looked before. Marcus went back to his work. He had a full afternoon, reports from the eastern border, a meeting with his supply coordinator, a review of the ceremony guest arrangements that had been updated to account for one additional delegation from the far northern territory. He moved through all of it with his usual precision and steadiness. But something had shifted, not loudly, not in a way that changed anything about how he moved through his day, or how he spoke to the people around him. Just internally, in the quiet place where Cale lived, something had settled differently than it had been the day before. He did not know yet what it meant. He only knew that in the morning, before he was fully awake, his first thought had not been about the crown. It had been about whether the pup in the forest was still breathing. By evening, the entire settlement was buzzing softly with the energy of coming ceremony. The decorations were being prepared, the tribute arrangements were nearly finalized. The visiting pack delegations would begin arriving the following morning, and there was an air of expectation that Marcus could feel moving through every conversation, every small cluster of people he passed. 3 days. The ceremony was 3 days away. He stood at the edge of the settlement that night, in the same place he had stood the night before, looking out at the dark tree line. He thought about power. He had always understood power in practical terms. Power was the ability to make decisions and have them enacted. Power was the trust of your people, earned over time, and maintained through consistency. Power was what allowed you to protect the things you were responsible for. He had never been drawn to power for its own sake. He had always understood it as a tool, not a reward. This was, many people believed, what made him a good leader. He did not love being obeyed. He loved the outcomes that good decisions produced. The crown would formalize his power in a way that went beyond the practical. It would make the bond between Marcus and the Alpha King's authority, not just social but something deeper, something that lived in the spirit and could not be taken back. He had always understood this as a kind of completion, a natural progression. He was already the Alpha. The crown would simply make it permanent. He breathed in. The night air was cold and clean. Cale was quiet. And Marcus, standing at the edge of the settlement with the ceremony 3 days away, and the whole pack turning slowly toward that moment, the way a field of grass bends toward wind, found himself wondering, for the very first time, whether completion and permanence were always the same thing. He did not sleep well that first night, not because anything specific was wrong, but because Cale was restless, in the way that wolves are restless when they are following a scent that keeps shifting. Just when you think you have it, the wind changes, and you have to start again. Marcus lay in the dark and felt his wolf moving through something that he could not name, and after a while, he stopped trying to name it, and simply let the night pass around him until morning came. He was at the forest before sunrise. He did not examine this too closely. He told himself he was checking the boundary again, which was reasonable. The ceremony was in 2 days now, and with visiting delegations arriving, it was sensible to ensure the restricted perimeter was clear and properly marked. This was a true reason. It was also not the only reason. Cale had been moving toward the tree line since before Marcus had even risen from bed, with the kind of steady, uncomplicated certainty that meant the wolf had already decided where they were going, and was simply waiting for Marcus's body to catch up. He entered the trees. The forest was different at this hour than it had been the day before. The light was almost invisible, just a thin, pale quality to the darkness that suggested the sun was somewhere below the horizon and climbing slowly. The pine smell was stronger in the cold, and the dew had turned the fallen needles into something that felt almost soft beneath his boots. He moved quietly, not from habit, though he had trained for quiet movement since childhood. He moved quietly because the forest asked for it. He heard her before he saw her. Not her voice. He already knew there would be no voice. But there was a sound that she made without knowing she made it. A small, rhythmic sound, low and steady, like someone humming very far back in their throat without letting it become music. It was barely a sound at all. But Marcus's hearing was sharp, and Cale's attention made it sharper, and he turned toward it without hesitation. She was in the same hollow between the ancient roots, but the pup was not lying down this time. It was sitting up, small and unsteady, its legs not entirely sure of themselves yet, but upright, with its silver head lifted, and its dark eyes open and focused on Lena's face. Lena was sitting across from it, about 3 feet away, perfectly still, watching it with an expression of such complete and private satisfaction that Marcus stopped and said nothing for a moment, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly a significant moment between the two of them. The pup blinked. It wobbled slightly, caught itself, and then very deliberately took 1 step toward her. Lena's face did not change. She did not smile in the large, dramatic way that people smile when they are performing happiness for an audience. But something around her eyes became softer, and Marcus, who was watching her carefully, saw it. She held out one hand, palm up, very low to the ground, and waited. The pup sniffed at her fingers. Its tail moved, just slightly. Once. Then again. Marcus exhaled without meaning to, and the sound made Lena's head turn. She looked at him. He expected the stillness he had seen the day before, that careful, contained watchfulness. It was there, but there was something else too. She did not look afraid. She did not look irritated at the interruption. She looked at him the way you look at something that you have been expecting to arrive and are not entirely surprised to see, and then she turned back to the pup. Marcus came closer and crouched down. The pup saw him and its small body stiffened. It was very young, and it did not know what to make of a grown wolf, especially one with the kind of presence Marcus carried even when he was trying not to carry it. He waited, keeping himself very still, and after a moment, the pup's body relaxed slightly, and it took 1 more step, this time toward Marcus's outstretched hand. Cale was completely, utterly still inside him. Not the way a predator goes still before movement, the way a river goes still, in a moment between currents, everything pausing in a kind of held breath, waiting for what comes next. The pup touched its nose to Marcus's fingers. Marcus looked at Lena. She was watching the pup, not him, and there was that soft quality around her eyes again. He looked at her hands, the way they rested on her knees, relaxed and open. He looked at the coat that was too large for her. He looked at her feet, where her boots had been laced very carefully, each lace tied in a double knot, as though she had recently learned how to do it, and was being very precise about it. He thought about what he had been told the day before, about the hollow tree, about 14 months of silence. He did not say anything to her. He stayed for perhaps 15 minutes, and when the pup had settled itself comfortably against Lena's knee and closed its eyes again, he stood up and walked back to the settlement. That afternoon, the first of the visiting delegations arrived, a group of 12 from the Eastern River Pack, led by their senior council member, a man named Grant, who had known Marcus's father, and who was good at formal occasions in the way that some people are good at languages, easily, and without effort. Marcus greeted them, conducted the preliminary meetings that protocol required, and spent the late afternoon reviewing the territorial exchange documents that needed to be signed before the ceremony. It was a full afternoon. He moved through it efficiently. But underneath all of it, in the quiet place where Cale lived, there was something new. It was not a thought. It was more like a question that had not yet found its words. A space opening up in him, slowly, the way a window opens to let in air that you had not realized you needed. He ate dinner with Grant's delegation. The conversation was easy and familiar. News from the Eastern Territories, an update on the river dispute that had been quietly resolved the previous winter, a discussion of the spring trade routes. Marcus listened and spoke with the unhurried ease of a man who had attended 1,000 such dinners and found them genuinely interesting. He liked Grant. He liked most people when they were being straightforward, which Grant usually was. After dinner, he walked the settlement's eastern boundary, as he often did in the evenings, a habit he had maintained since his first year as Alpha. He was not checking the perimeter for practical reasons at this point. That was Owen's role, and Owen was excellent at it. Marcus walked the boundary because it helped him think, and because it reminded him, in a physical, immediate way, of the scale of what he was responsible for. He found himself thinking about Lena without deciding to. He thought about the way she moved through the settlement according to the reports he had received, quietly, efficiently, doing her work without being asked twice, without drawing attention. He thought about the way she had sat in the forest, so completely in her element on the cold ground among the roots, as though the rest of the world with its expectations and its voices was something she had simply removed herself from, not in weakness, but in a kind of purposeful quiet. He thought about what it would take for a child to choose silence, not to be unable to speak. She was not unable, the healer had confirmed that. To choose it, to look at the world that had taken everything from her, and decide that her voice was something she would keep inside, where it could not be reached or used or taken. It was not, Marcus thought, a passive choice. It was, in its own way, a form of strength. He stopped walking. He was at the northern corner of the boundary, where the fence posts gave way to the natural barrier of the oldest trees, and he stood there for a moment, looking at the forest. In there, somewhere, in the hollow between the roots, a small silver pup was probably sleeping against a girl who did not speak. Cale moved, not restlessly this time, slowly, like a wolf turning to face a new direction, deliberately, as though deciding. Marcus stood for a while longer, and then he went to bed. The next morning he went to the forest again, and this time he brought something. He did not spend a great deal of time thinking about whether this was appropriate. Cale had given him no doubt, which meant Marcus had none either. He brought a small piece of dried meat from the kitchen, the kind they kept for training young wolves, soft enough for a pup to manage. He wrapped it in cloth and put it in his coat pocket and walked to the trees. Lena was there. She looked up when he arrived, and something about the way she looked up this time was different. Not the guarded watchfulness of someone unsure of their safety, but the steady acknowledgement of someone who had decided that this person was trustworthy. She had made that decision. Marcus could see it in her face, and he understood that it was not a small thing. He sat down on one of the exposed roots, not too close, giving her space, and unwrapped the cloth. The pup's nose went up immediately. Marcus set the food down on the ground between them, equidistant from both, and waited. The pup went for it. Lena watched the pup with that careful attention she had for all living things. When it had finished eating, she reached into her own coat pocket and produced a small piece of bread, which she fed to it from her palm. Marcus watched her. "How long have you been coming here?" he asked. She did not answer. He had expected this. He waited a moment, and then she held up 4 fingers. 4 days, he guessed. She shook her head. She thought for a second, and then she held up 4 fingers again, and then made a gesture with her hand. 4 repetitions of something. He studied her, working it out. 4 something. 4 weeks? He frowned slightly, not in frustration but in concentration. She watched him work through it with the patient calm of someone who was accustomed to waiting for people to understand her. 4 weeks, he said. She nodded. You found him 4 weeks ago. Another nod. And you've been coming every day. She tilted her head slightly to one side, which he interpreted as a yes, that was also a correction. Not just coming, but caring for, watching, doing whatever it was she had been doing with those gentle, confident hands that had brought the pup from whatever state it had been in 4 weeks ago, to sitting up and wagging its tail. Marcus looked at her. He thought about the kitchen staff who had tried to chase her away from the boundary, and the months of people trying to get her to talk, and the formal household that fed her, and clothed her in coats that were too large, and probably did not ask her much at all after the first few attempts. He thought about the forest, which asked nothing of her, and gave her this. He's doing better, Marcus said, looking at the pup. Whatever you've been doing, it's working. She looked at the pup too, and again that small softening happened around her eyes. She reached out and touched the top of the pup's head, one brief, light stroke of her fingers. Marcus said nothing for a while. The forest was quiet around them, the birds mourning busy in the branches, the light coming now in long pale lines between the trees. He was aware, distantly, that he had a delegation breakfast in 2 hours, and a full agenda after that, and that sitting on a tree root in the restricted forest, with a silent child and a recovering wolf pup, was not what anyone in the settlement would have predicted for their alpha king this morning. He found that he did not care about this at all. Cale was very quiet, not the waiting stillness of before, a new kind of quiet, something settled and warm, like a fire that has been burning long enough to have a good bed of coals. Marcus sat with it. He had always trusted Kale more than he trusted most people. Not because his wolf was infallible, but because Kale had never once in his life reacted to something false. When Kale felt something, it was real. Whatever Kale was feeling right now, sitting here, in this forest, 3 feet from a small girl who had chosen silence as her only remaining form of sovereignty, was real. Marcus stood up eventually. The light had shifted, and time was moving. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. He said it simply, not as a promise made for her benefit, but as a plain statement of what was going to happen. She was looking at the pup. She did not look up. But one of her hands, the one that had been resting on her knee, turned slightly outward, palm up, for just a second, an open hand, not reaching, not asking, just open. He understood it perfectly. He walked back to the settlement. The delegation breakfast was good. Grant was an easy conversation partner, and 2 members of his group had interesting things to say about a new trade arrangement developing between 3 of the southeastern territories. Marcus ate, contributed to the conversation with the kind of precise, considered commentary that always made his council members privately grateful that he never said more than was needed. After breakfast, he met with his supply coordinator to finalize the ceremony feast arrangements, then reviewed Owen's updated security position map, then sat for 40 minutes with Elder Gareth, who wanted to walk through the ceremony sequence one final time. Gareth talked. Marcus listened. He asked the right questions at the right moments. He gave the right answers. Everything was in order. The ceremony was tomorrow evening. Everything was ready. But something was not right, and Marcus knew it, even if he could not yet say what it was. He sat alone in his study that evening and looked at the wall. Not at anything on the wall. There was nothing particular on that wall to look at. He just sat and let himself be quiet in the way that Kale was quiet, and he waited to see what would rise up. What rose up was not a doubt about the ceremony, not a fear about the crown, not any specific thought he could hold and examine. It was more like a feeling about the future, a feeling about what his life would look like after tomorrow night, and the feeling was not what he expected. He expected it to feel like completion. That was what everyone said, what the elders said, what the traditions said, what his father had said on the night before his own bonding. A completion. A rightness. What Marcus felt instead, sitting alone in his study with the ceremony one day away, was something much closer to a door closing. He sat with this for a long time. He did not try to talk himself out of it. He did not perform certainty for himself the way he might perform it for others. He just sat and let the feeling be what it was, and he thought about Lena's open hand, and he thought about Kale's warm cold quiet, and he thought about the pup standing up on its unsteady legs and taking that first step forward. He did not sleep much that night, but what little sleep he found was the deepest he had had in weeks. The elders had always chosen morning light for important meetings. Elder Gareth believed that decisions made in morning light were cleaner and more honest than decisions made in the afternoon, when the mind had already been worn down by the day. Marcus had heard him say this many times. He had always found it mildly superstitious, but he had also never had a strong reason to argue with it. And so when all 5 elders were gathered in the council room by 7 in the morning on the day before the ceremony, the pale early light coming through the high windows and catching the dust motes in the air, Marcus sat at the head of the table and felt that this, at least, was appropriate. The meeting began with routine matters. There was a resource allocation question that had been pending for 2 weeks, involving the southern grain stores and whether the surplus should be traded or banked against winter. Marcus made the decision quickly and well. This was easy territory for him, the kind of practical problem he handled instinctively. Then there was an update on the visiting delegations, all 3 of whom were now settled in the guest quarters. Then, a brief discussion of tomorrow's ceremony timing, confirming that the hall would open at dusk, and the bonding itself would occur at full dark. And then Elder Gareth set down his papers and looked at Marcus in a way that was slightly different from his usual manner. And Marcus felt the meeting change. "There is one more matter," Gareth said. "It is not on the record. It is something that the council has always conveyed to the Alpha King privately, the day before the ceremony. I want to be clear that what I am about to tell you is not new information. It is information that has been withheld from you until this moment, by deliberate design. And that design is traditional. Every Alpha King before you received this information exactly when you are receiving it, and no sooner." Marcus said nothing. He waited. Gareth looked at the other 4 elders. They were all quiet, and they were all watching Marcus, with expressions that he had not seen on their faces before. He had seen these 5 people in many situations, in conflicts, in celebrations, in moments of deep difficulty. He knew their faces well. What he was seeing now was not guilt, exactly. It was closer to the look of people who have been carrying something for a very long time, and are now, finally, setting it down. The crown, Gareth said, is not simply what it has been presented to you as. Marcus kept his expression still. Tell me, he said. Gareth folded his hands on the table. The crown was created by the founding elders of the Northern Pack 4 generations back, he said. It was created at a time of great external threat, when 3 rival territories were pressing against our borders simultaneously, and when the Pack's survival required something more than ordinary leadership. What the founding elders understood was that an Alpha King, whose loyalties were undivided, who had no personal attachments that could be leveraged against him, no bonds that could be threatened to force concessions, no tenderness that could be used as a weakness, was infinitely more difficult to defeat. He paused. The crown was forged to ensure that the Alpha King would always be that kind of leader. Marcus watched him. What does that mean, specifically? The crown creates a bond, Gareth said carefully. A bond between the Alpha and the Pack's territorial authority. That bond is absolute. It means that the Alpha King's first loyalty, his deepest loyalty, the loyalty that overrides all others, will always be to the Pack's expansion and survival, not to individuals, not to families, not to any particular relationship that might make him vulnerable. He paused again. Past Alpha Kings who bonded the crown were not able, afterward, to prioritize specific individuals over the Pack's strategic interests. Those who tried, who attempted to protect or favor someone the crown judged as a liability, found the bond working against them. Specifically, said Elder Petra, the youngest of the 5, a woman in her mid-50s with precise, careful speech. There was an Alpha King, 2 generations back, who bonded with a mate who was not considered strategically valuable. The crown compelled him to distance himself from her. He resisted for several years. The bond made those years very difficult for him. And the one before that, said Elder Wall, a quiet man who rarely spoke first, had adopted a young orphaned boy from a border territory who had no wolf spirit. The crown would not permit the attachment to continue. The boy was eventually sent away. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. So the crown decides, he said finally, not the Alpha King. The Alpha King decides, Gareth said carefully. But the crown shapes what he wants to decide. It does not force him. It changes what feels right to him, over time. It makes the Pack's strategic interest feel like his own natural desire. Most Alpha Kings who bonded the crown never felt conflicted at all, because the crown ensured that they genuinely wanted what was best for the Pack's power, above everything else. And those who resisted it? Gareth's face was still. They found the bond to be a very difficult thing to carry. Marcus looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He thought about what Gareth had just described, a thing that reached into a man and reshaped what he loved, what he valued, what he wanted for his own life, and he let himself feel exactly what he felt about it, without filtering it or managing it for anyone in this room. What he felt was very clear. When you said the information was withheld by design, he said, what was the design? What was the reason for telling the Alpha King the day before, rather than further in advance? Gareth and Petra exchanged a glance. The founders believed, Gareth said, that an Alpha King, who knew about the crown's nature too far in advance, might refuse it. The day before was considered close enough to the ceremony that the arrangements, the expectations, the presence of visiting delegations, all of it, would make refusal socially and politically very costly. The momentum of the occasion was considered a safeguard against hesitation. Against hesitation, Marcus repeated. Yes, or against a clear-minded decision. Gareth did not answer. That was, in itself, an answer. Marcus stood up, not with anger. He did not feel anger, exactly, though something hot and clear was moving through him. He felt the same thing he felt when he was working out a complex problem, and suddenly saw the shape of it completely, all at once. I would like the rest of the day to consider this, he said. I will not make any decisions in this room this morning. The elders looked at each other. Gareth rose as well. Marcus, he said quietly, the visiting delegations, the ceremony arrangements, the Pack's expectations, all of these. Our mind to consider, Marcus said, along with everything else. Thank you, Gareth. That's all. He left the room. He walked fast, which was unusual for him. He moved through the settlement corridors without seeing the people he passed, and when he reached the outside, he kept walking, and his feet took him, without any conscious decision, toward the tree line. He entered the forest. He did not go to the hollow between the roots. He walked deeper, into the older part where the trees were so large that you could feel the age of them, the way you feel the cold of deep water. And he stopped when he reached the place where a great tree had fallen years ago and left a wide clearing open to the sky. He stood in the clearing and breathed. Cale was completely still, not the new warm coal stillness. This was different. This was the stillness of a wolf who has heard something definitive and is processing it from a deep and quiet place inside himself. Marcus knew this stillness. He had felt it only twice before, once when he learned of his father's death, and once when he had made the decision to exile the 4 council members who had betrayed the Pack's eastern border agreement. Those had been moments when something irreversible was happening, and Cale had gone into this deep, waiting silence to accompany Marcus through it. He stood in the clearing for a long time. He thought about what the crown would do, not in abstract terms. He was past abstract now. He thought about it in concrete, specific terms. He thought about Lena. He thought about her in the forest with the pup and her open hand, and the small nod she had given him when he asked if the pup would be all right. He thought about what the crown would make him feel about a child like Lena, a silent orphan with no wolf spirit, no strategic value, no attachment to the Pack's power structure. He thought about what it would be like to have something inside him, slowly reshape his feelings about her into something that felt, to him, like indifference. He stood with this thought and did not look away from it. Then he thought about the crown's actual offer. Absolute power. Territorial authority that no rival pack could challenge. A bond that made the Alpha King genuinely, completely and permanently devoted to the pack's strength above all else. These were not small things. He understood their value. He had spent his entire adult life working toward exactly the kind of strength and stability the crown promised. He knew, better than almost anyone, what that stability was worth, what it bought in safety for ordinary pack members, in security for families, in the ability to make long-term decisions rather than constantly reacting to threats. He stood with this thought too, and did not look away from it either. The sky above the clearing was very blue. A bird crossed it, a large one, a hawk or something close, moving without effort on the air currents, present and free and going wherever the wind and its own intention took it. Marcus watched it until it was gone. Then he breathed out, slowly, and something inside him settled into a decision that he had not fully made yet, but that was coming. It was coming the way morning comes, not all at once, but steadily, and with a certainty that made it very clear that the darkness was not going to last. He walked back to the settlement. He had a full day ahead of him. The ceremony was tomorrow. The visiting delegations needed to be attended to. Owen needed to be briefed. There were 20 things that required his attention before evening. He attended to all of them. He moved through the afternoon with his usual precision and steadiness, and no one who spoke to him that day would have been able to say that anything was different. But Cale, who was never wrong about what was real, had stopped being still. His wolf was awake now, not restless, not uncertain, moving inside him with the slow, powerful purposefulness of something that has made up its mind. The ceremony was tomorrow. Marcus knew, by the time he sat down to his evening meal, that tomorrow was not going to go the way anyone expected. He set down his fork. He breathed in. He thought of Lena's open hand, palm up, not asking for anything, just open. He went to find her. The last light of the day was thin and low, cutting sideways through the spaces between the buildings and painting the settlement in a shade of gold that made everything look older and quieter than it was. Marcus walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his pace unhurried, and the people he passed read his face the way people always read his face, with respect, and with the assumption that whatever he was thinking it in the controlled, purposeful way that he always thought things. They did not look closely enough to see the different quality in his eyes tonight. He knew where Lena would be at this hour. He had learned her rhythms without setting out to, the way you learn the patterns of something you have been paying close attention to. In the late afternoon, she came back from wherever she had been during the day and went to the small animal pen behind the Eastern household unit, where she helped the keeper with the evening feeding. After that, she ate in the common kitchen. She was always finished and gone to the small room she occupied before the evening gathering that the household unit held 3 times a week. He found her at the animal pen. She was working with her back to him, filling the water troughs with the calm, economical movements of someone who has done this task so many times that it no longer requires thought. The evening keeper, an older man named Fred, was at the other end of the pen doing something with the feed store. He looked up when Marcus arrived, and his eyes went wide, and he straightened very quickly, because Alpha Kings did not typically appear at the animal pens at evening feeding time. "Sir," Fred said. "Carry on," Marcus said, and Fred, who was sensible, did exactly that. Lena had not turned when Marcus arrived. She continued filling the trough, and when it was full, she moved to the next one, and when that was full, she set down the bucket and finally turned, and she saw him. She looked at him for a moment, then at the pen around them, then back at him, with an expression that Marcus was beginning to learn to read. She was asking, without words, whether something was wrong. "Nothing is wrong," he said. "I wanted to talk to you. Or, to be with you for a moment. I know you don't talk back. That's fine." She considered him. Then she walked to the fence and leaned against it, facing him, which he took as permission. He came and leaned against the fence on his side, leaving the space between the fence posts between them. The animals moved in the pen behind her. The evening light was very beautiful, and neither of them said anything about that. "Tomorrow is the ceremony," Marcus said. Not asking her if she knew. He was sure she knew. The whole settlement knew. "The elders told me something about the crown this morning. Something I hadn't been told before." He paused. He was not someone who explained himself to others as a general habit. He found, tonight, that he wanted to explain this. Not to seek her opinion, she was 7 years old, possibly younger, but because something about her complete absence of expectation made it possible to say true things. "The crown changes you," he said, "not all at once. Over time, it changes what matters to you, what you care about. It's designed to make the Alpha King care about power and territory above everything else, and to make that feel natural, feel right, so that you don't even know it's happening." He looked at the animals in the pen. The elders said it's always been this way, that it's what makes the Alpha King strong. Lena was watching him. Her face was serious, and still, and completely present. "The thing is," Marcus said, "I've spent a long time building something here, making this pack strong, making it safe. And I believe in that work. I believe it matters. But I think there's a difference between a leader who chooses to put his people first, and a leader who has been shaped to have no other choice." He paused. "I think that difference matters, even if the outcome looks the same from the outside." She was quiet. The light had shifted. The gold was going out of it, the sky above them deepening toward the first blue of evening. "The crown would also make me stop caring about things I currently care about," Marcus said, and his voice was careful now. "Attachments that the crown considers liabilities. People who are not strategically useful." He looked at her. "A child who doesn't speak." Lena's face didn't change. She held his gaze with the steady, uncomplicated directness that was entirely her own. "I don't know yet exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow," Marcus said. And this was true. He knew what was coming inside him. He felt the decision building the way you feel, weather building, but he had not yet arrived at the full shape of it. "But I wanted you to know that the things I've seen in the forest, and here, with you, those things are real to me. They're not things I want to have reshaped." Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her too large coat and took something out. She held it out toward him over the fence, and he reached out and took it. It was a small flat stone, smooth and gray-white, the kind you find at the edge of moving water. Not remarkable, except that someone had held it long enough to make it warm, and on one side, scratched very faintly with something sharp, was a shape. He looked at it more carefully in the fading light. It was a wolf, small and simple, not detailed, but unmistakably a wolf, not running, not threatening, standing still, head up, looking at something in the distance. He closed his hand around it. "Thank you," he said, and then, because it was true, "I'll see you after tomorrow. Whatever happens, I'll see you." She nodded. One small, definitive nod. Fred was still busy at the far end of the pen, doing a very thorough job of not watching them. Marcus pushed off the fence and walked away, back through the golden going light, with the stone in his fist, and Cale moving through him like a river that has found its direction. He walked until he reached the place at the edge of the settlement that he always walked to in the evenings, and he stood there, looking at the dark tree line, and he thought. He thought for a long time. He thought about his father, who had taken the crown without hesitation, and been, by all accounts, a good alpha king, strong and effective and feared in the right ways. He thought about whether his father had felt the crown change him, or whether it had been so gradual that there was nothing to feel, just a slow warmth of certainty, replacing whatever doubts and tenderness he had carried before. He thought about what the pack needed. He thought about this honestly, without performing certainty in either direction. The pack needed leadership. It needed stability. It needed someone who would make hard decisions without flinching. None of those things required the crown. He had been providing all of them for years without it. The crown offered something more than that, something he had once thought of as completion, but which he now understood to be more accurately described as reduction. A reduction of everything that might make him human, in the name of making him powerful. He opened his hand and looked at the stone. The small wolf, scratched in the surface, standing still with its head up. He thought about Lena. He thought about what she had survived, and what she had chosen afterward. He thought about the way she had chosen silence, not as a retreat, but as a kind of sovereignty, keeping her voice inside herself, where it belonged to no one else. He thought about the way she had trusted him, not with words, not with performance, but with her open hand and her direct eyes, and the simple, quiet willingness to let him be present in the places that mattered to her. Not what kind of alpha king, not what kind of leader, or what kind of strategist, or what kind of ruler, just what kind of man. The answer came without effort. He put the stone in his pocket. He went inside. He changed for the ceremony, the formal clothes that had been laid out for him, dark and serious, with no decoration, except the rank markings on the cuffs that he had earned one at a time over 15 years. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. He looked like what he was, a man who had been built for a specific purpose, and had spent his whole life living up to it. He was about to choose what that purpose actually was. He breathed in. He breathed out. Cale, settled and certain and absolutely present, moved through him like a current. Marcus turned away from the mirror and went to meet his fate. The hall was extraordinary when it was prepared for ceremony. This Marcus had always known. But standing at the far doors and looking down its full length tonight, he felt it more acutely than he ever had before. The torches were at their highest, the light warm and strong, and casting everything in a rich amber that made the stone walls look like something carved from the earth's deepest places. The banners of the Northern Pack hung from the ceiling at regular intervals, silver on dark blue, the wolf mark at the center of each one. Every bench and standing space was occupied. 300 people, perhaps more. The entire senior membership of the Northern Pack, plus all 3 visiting delegations, seated by protocol at the front. The elders at the altar platform. Owen and his senior warriors at their positions along the walls. The household heads, the trade coordinators, the healers, the teachers. Every face in the hall turned when the doors opened, and every face found him, and the collective held breath of 300 people was something you could feel on your skin. Marcus walked. He walked the way he always walked. No performance in it, no theater, just the forward motion of a man who is going somewhere he has decided to go. The crowd parted before him and closed behind him. He heard nothing specific. There was a low sound in the room, voices and breath and the shift of bodies making space, but it blended into a single undertone that he moved through without registering. He reached the altar platform. The crown was on the altar. He had imagined it many times. The actual object was more present than imagination, which is always the way. Things you have only heard described have a particular quality when you finally stand in front of them. The crown was silver, as he had been told. It was not large. It sat on a dark wooden base, and its surface had the color of old metal, the kind that has deepened over decades into something that is no longer simply reflective, but has become its own substance. He could feel it from where he stood, not see it, but feel it. A weight in the air, a pressure. Cale felt it too. His wolf went absolutely still. Not the warm coal stillness, not the deep river stillness. Something different, something that Marcus had not felt from Cale in 31 years of living together. It was a stillness that was also a refusal, the way a wolf plants its feet and lowers its weight and becomes immovable, not from stubbornness, but from a deep and complete knowledge of what it will and will not accept. Marcus stood before the altar. Elder Gareth rose from his seat to the left of the altar and came to stand beside it. The hall was completely, entirely silent. Gareth was very good at silence. He let it hold for several seconds before he began the formal words, the words that had been spoken at every crown ceremony for 4 generations, words Marcus had heard repeated in fragments his entire life. "We are gathered," Gareth said, "to witness the completion of a lineage. The Alpha King of the Northern Pack stands before us, to receive what is rightfully his, the bond of his ancestors, the power of his blood, the authority of his territory, made permanent and absolute in the forging of the crown's promise." Marcus looked at the crown. He thought about the word permanent. He thought about what Gareth had told him that morning, the way the crown worked, slowly and from the inside, reshaping what a man loved until it no longer felt like reshaping. He thought about every Alpha King before him who had stood in this exact position, looking at this same object, and had reached out and taken it, and had perhaps never afterward found a reason to wonder what they had lost. He thought about Lena's stone in his pocket, pressing against his thigh. Gareth continued the formal words. Marcus heard them distantly, as though from the other side of water. The words described the crown as a gift, as an honor, as the fulfillment of everything an Alpha King had been born to receive. They were beautiful words. They had always sounded beautiful to him. Tonight they sounded like a door. He reached out and picked up the crown. The hall drew a single collective breath. The crown was cool in his hands, heavier than he expected. Or perhaps that was the other weight, the one he had felt from across the room. He held it and felt it and looked down at it. He thought about how it would feel to put it on. He thought about what the elders had described, the gradual, comfortable certainty it would create. He thought about whether, in 5 years or 10 years, he would even remember standing here and making this choice. He thought, this is the last moment. Whatever comes after this moment will be shaped by what happens now. And what happens now is mine. Cale did not move. His wolf was planted and immovable and completely, unequivocally certain. Marcus set the crown back down on the altar. The sound in the hall was extraordinary. Not loud, not a shout or a gasp, but a collective shift in the quality of the silence, something that moved through 300 people like a wave through still water. He heard it. He felt it move through him and then continue past him, out into the room. He turned to face the assembly. Every face was looking at him. Some were stunned. Some were confused. 1 or 2, in the very back, already had their mouths open, as though words were building that had not yet found their way out. Gareth was motionless beside the altar, his face arranged into an expression of careful stillness that did not quite cover what was beneath it. Marcus spoke. His voice was exactly what it always was, level, clear, carrying to every corner of the hall without effort, the voice of someone accustomed to being heard in large spaces. My wolf does not accept this crown. 7 words. The wave that had moved through the room before was nothing compared to what followed this. The sound was immediate and complex. Not one sound, but many, layered together. Confusion, disbelief, several voices starting sentences that stopped before they finished. Somewhere near the back, a chair scraping against stone. One of the visiting delegation members leaned sharply toward his neighbor and spoke quietly, urgently. Gareth reached out and put one hand on the altar as though steadying himself. Marcus stood completely still. He felt Cale in his chest, and what his wolf was doing was remarkable. Not howling, not threatening, not performing dominance or strength. Cale was simply standing, the way a mountain stands, not making any argument, not needing to, because the weight of what it was required no argument. And the effect of this on the wolves in the room was immediate and involuntary, one by one, without being told, without being commanded. The wolves of the Northern Pack lowered their eyes, not in defeat, in the recognition of something genuine. Elder Wall, who had been seated beside Gareth, rose slowly from his chair. His expression was not angry. It was something older than anger, something close to grief, and beneath the grief, something that looked, if Marcus was reading it correctly, like a complicated and suppressed relief. One of the other elders, Holt, who was 60 years old and had always been the most practical of the 5, leaned forward and said, in a voice pitched to carry to Marcus but not much further. "You understand what this means?" "I do," Marcus said. "The delegations are my guests," Marcus said, "and I will speak to them this evening, but not in this hall, and not right now." There was another movement near the front. Elder Petra rising, one hand raised, beginning to say something about protocol. Marcus turned his gaze to her, and she stopped, not because he frightened her, because what she saw in his face was not impulsiveness or rebellion or any kind of emotional decision made without thought. What she saw was the face of a man who had made a choice from the deepest part of himself and who knew exactly what he had chosen. She sat back down. Marcus turned once more to the room, to all 300 faces looking at him, and he took a breath. "The Northern Pack is not weaker tonight than it was this morning," he said. "It will not be weaker tomorrow. I am still your alpha. I will still lead with everything I have, and I will still hold this territory with everything I am. That has not changed." He paused. "But I will not accept a bond that shapes what I am allowed to love. That is all." The hall was very quiet. He stepped down from the platform and walked toward the side door. No one moved to stop him. The wolves in the hall, every wolf of the Northern Pack who was present, had their eyes down, and even those who were not wolves, the humans and others in the crowd, seemed to feel the quality of the moment and held themselves still. He opened the side door and stepped out into the night. The air was cold and immediate against his face. He stood in the small courtyard outside the hall and breathed it in. Pine and stone and cold, and the enormous, indifferent sky. He reached into his pocket and closed his fingers around the small stone. The wolf scratched into its surface, pressed against his palm. His heart was beating hard. He had not let himself feel it inside, because he had needed everything inside him to be absolutely steady. But out here, in the dark courtyard with no one watching, he let his pulse be what it was, fast and real and alive. Kale opened up inside him like a door swinging wide. And for the first time in Marcus's memory, his wolf did not restrain itself. Kale poured through him, not a howl, not a threat, but something that felt like joy, deep and total and completely unperformed. The joy of a creature that has been trusted absolutely and has been proven worthy of that trust. Marcus stood in the courtyard and let it move through him. Whatever came next, the political fallout, the delegations, the elders, the pack's response, would come. He had never been afraid of consequences. He had only ever been afraid of choosing wrong, and tonight, for the first time in a very long time, he was certain he had not. The morning after the ceremony came with gray skies and wind from the east, and Marcus was already awake when it arrived. He had slept, somehow, which surprised him. He had expected the night to be restless, given everything that had happened. Instead, he had fallen into a deep, clean sleep somewhere around midnight, and woken before dawn feeling more rested than he had in weeks. He lay in the quiet for a while, and listened to the wind moving around the buildings, and thought about the day ahead. It was going to be a complicated day. He rose, washed and dressed. He did not put on ceremony clothes. He wore the same plain, practical clothes he wore on any ordinary day. Dark trousers, a gray shirt, the heavy coat that he favored for cold mornings. He looked at himself in the mirror briefly. He looked like a man who had slept and woken up and was going to do his work. This was accurate. He went to his study first, before any meetings, and sat for 20 minutes with a clean sheet of paper in front of him. He wrote, not a formal statement, that would come later, drafted carefully, with whichever elder was still willing to assist him, and shaped for public communication. This was a private working out, a list of the things that needed to be addressed, and in what order. He wrote in his usual way, precise, concise, without any wasted motion. The first item on the list was the visiting delegations. He had sent Owen to speak with all 3 delegation heads the previous night, immediately after the ceremony, with a message that Marcus would meet with each of them this morning, and that they were in no way obligated to remain, if they preferred to return to their territories, but that Marcus hoped they would stay for a conversation. 2 of the 3 had responded through Owen that they would stay. The third, the head of the far northern delegation, a man named Conrad who had been outspoken about his personal preferences before the ceremony even began, had not responded, which could mean anything or nothing. Marcus would find out. He also wrote down Gareth, Petra, Wall, Holt. The 5th elder's name was Bram, and Bram had not spoken once during the ceremony or after. Marcus put a note beside Bram's name that said uncertain, because Bram was the kind of man who watched carefully before he moved, and Marcus did not yet have a reading on him. He wrote, Owen, the security situation. If there was going to be any external threat from the rival territories who had been watching the ceremony from a distance, and Marcus had no doubt there were several, the response needed to be planned clearly and quickly. He wrote, Lena, not as a problem to be solved, just to acknowledge that she was part of the picture, and that he intended to address her situation properly, and in the right way, when the more immediately critical matters were managed. He looked at the list for a moment, and then folded it and put it in his pocket. He went to meet Grant first. Grant was from the Eastern River Pack, and Grant was a pragmatic man who had been in leadership long enough to have seen extraordinary things become ordinary. He met Marcus in the small meeting room off the main corridor, and he was alone, without any of his delegation members, which Marcus interpreted as a signal that Grant intended this to be a real conversation rather than a formal one. They sat across from each other. A fire had been lit, and it was warm in the room. Well, Grant said. Yes, Marcus said. Grant studied him for a moment. I've been in this work for 26 years, he said. I've seen 4 crown ceremonies. I've never seen anything like what happened last night. I imagine not, Marcus said. The question that my people are going to ask, Grant said carefully, is whether the Northern Pack is stable. That's the practical question. It's not a judgment. It's what everyone needs to know. The Northern Pack is stable, Marcus said. I'm still the Alpha. Nothing about my authority or my commitment to this territory has changed. What changed is that I won't be bonded to the Crown, and the Crown will need to be addressed, whether that means a new process or a revision of the ceremony traditions. The elders and I will work through that. But the Pack's functioning, its leadership, its relationships with allied territories, none of that changes. Grant nodded slowly. He picked up the cup of tea that had been set on the table and held it with both hands. The Crown's bond, he said after a moment. You were told about it? The nature of it? Yesterday morning, Marcus said, the day before the ceremony. We've heard things, Grant said, about what the bond does, rumors mostly, nothing official. He looked at Marcus with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a man who does not need to dress things up. It sounds, from what I've heard, like a very effective tool for producing a certain kind of leader. It is, Marcus said. That kind of leader is not what I'm going to be. Grant set down his tea. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why now? Grant said. You've been the Alpha for 7 years. The bond was always coming. You've known what it would mean. Why did you change course at the last moment? Marcus thought about Lena, about the forest and the pup and the open hand. He thought about how to answer this in a way that was true and also made sense to a practical man who had never been in a forest at dawn with a small girl who did not speak. Because I met someone, Marcus said, who reminded me of the difference between power and the reasons for having it. Grant looked at him for a long time. Then he gave one short nod. I'll speak to my delegation, he said. I think we stay. I think we see what kind of leader you turn out to be, without the Crown's assistance. He almost smiled. Frankly, I'm curious. So am I, Marcus said. The meeting with Conrad, the far northern delegation head, did not go as well. Conrad arrived in the meeting room with 2 of his council members, and a posture that made it clear he had come to object, not to discuss. He was a tall man with red hair going gray and a way of looking at people that suggested he had found most of them disappointing. You have destabilized this entire region, Conrad said, before Marcus had finished greeting him. Sit down, Conrad, Marcus said pleasantly. Conrad sat. I've destabilized nothing. The Northern Pack has exactly the same leadership, the same military strength, and the same territorial authority it had 3 days ago. The only thing that has changed is the presence of a ceremonial object. The Crown is not a ceremonial object, Conrad said. It is the basis of the Alpha King's claim to. My claim, Marcus said, is based on blood, service, council recognition, and the loyalty of my pack. All of those things are intact. The Crown adds a layer of formality. It does not create the underlying reality. He looked at Conrad calmly. What I think you are actually concerned about is whether the Northern Pack's commitment to the mutual defense agreements remains solid. The answer is yes. Nothing has changed. Conrad looked at him. He looked at the 2 council members on either side of him. He looked back at Marcus. There are packs, Conrad said, who will see this as weakness. There are packs who see breathing as weakness, Marcus said. I'm not particularly interested in managing the perceptions of people who are looking for an excuse to be hostile. He leaned forward slightly. If any territory moves against us because of what happened last night, they will discover that my wolf's decision about the crown has had no effect whatsoever on my warrior's decision-making. Conrad was quiet for a moment. You're very confident, he said. I'm very accurate, Marcus said. There's a difference. Conrad left, without giving him a firm answer about whether the far northern delegation would honor the existing agreements. But he left. He did not storm out. He did not make threats. He gathered his council members and departed with the controlled, considering expression of a man who was going to think about things before he decided anything. Marcus considered this, in context, a reasonable outcome. The meeting with the third delegation, from the Western Ridge Pack, was straightforward. Their lead, a woman named Cora, was younger than Marcus by several years and had been in her position for only 2 years. She had watched the ceremony with wide eyes and had afterward apparently spent the night reading every written record she could find about Northern Pack history. She arrived at the meeting with notes, which Marcus found both endearing and useful. I have questions, Cora said, sitting across from him. Good, Marcus said. Ask them. She asked 8 specific, intelligent questions about the political implications of his decision, the Northern Pack's succession plan if anything happened to Marcus, the status of the Elders' authority in the absence of a crown-bonded alpha, and the implications for 3 current inter-pack agreements. Marcus answered all 8 with the clarity and precision that she clearly appreciated, and by the end of the hour her notes had multiplied considerably, and she was looking at him with an expression that was part calculation and part something harder to name. We'll stay, she said, gathering her papers, and I'll want to talk more. Not about the agreements, those I'm satisfied on, about the rest. She paused. About what you said last night. About bonds that shape what you're allowed to love. She looked up at him. I'm interested in that. So am I, Marcus said, for the second time that morning. After the delegation meetings he met with Owen. Owen had been awake since before the ceremony had even ended. He had spent the night coordinating with his senior warriors, placing additional personnel at the territory's 3 most vulnerable points, and sending fast runners to the 2 allied packs who had not attended the ceremony, to inform them of the situation, before rumors reached them in distorted form. Owen was thorough. He was also one of the few people in the settlement who knew Marcus well enough to speak plainly. 12 people left the settlement this morning, Owen said. Household members who have ties to Elder Gareth's faction. I'm not treating them as hostile, but I'm tracking them. Good, Marcus said. There's also been a message from the Eastern Border Watch, Owen said. A patrol from the Grey Flank territory was spotted along the boundary line this morning. Not crossing. Just watching. He paused. This may mean nothing. Or it may mean that news travels faster than we expected, Marcus said. Increase the patrol frequency along the eastern boundary for the next 10 days. Don't escalate. Just presence. Done. Owen hesitated, which was unusual. And the elders are requesting a formal meeting. Gareth specifically asked for it to happen today. This afternoon, Marcus said. After the midday meal. In the main council room. He paused. I want Wall there if he's willing. And Bram. And Gareth and Petra and Holt, Owen said. Yes. All 5. Yes. Owen looked at him steadily. You know Gareth is going to push for the crown again. I know, Marcus said. Let him. The afternoon meeting with the elders was the longest meeting Marcus had attended in years. It lasted nearly 3 hours. Gareth did push for the crown. Formally. Carefully. With every argument he had, including some that Marcus had not expected, and that he found genuinely worth engaging with. The crown's bond, Gareth argued, was not about what it took away from the Alpha King. It was about what it gave the pack. The certainty that their leader would never put personal feeling above collective welfare. It was a safeguard. Not against the Alpha's weakness, but against the very human possibility that even a good Alpha might, in a critical moment, choose wrong. Marcus listened to this carefully. It was not a stupid argument. He said so. You're describing a reasonable concern, he said. The question is whether the solution is to remove the Alpha's judgment, or to ensure that his judgment is sound. The crown takes judgment out of the equation. I am proposing that we keep it in, and that we build safeguards that don't require reshaping a person from the inside to achieve them. That is a significant risk, Gareth said. Leadership always is, Marcus said. They went back and forth for a long time. Petra was sharp and specific in her arguments, and Marcus found the conversation with her the most useful of the afternoon. Holt said very little, but listened with extraordinary attention. Wall spoke twice, both times with a measured thoughtfulness that surprised Marcus. What he said, both times, leaned toward Marcus's position, though carefully enough that it could not be read as a definitive endorsement. And Bram, who had been silent through everything, spoke for the first and only time near the end of the meeting. He said 4 words. I think he's right. Everyone looked at him. I've thought it for 20 years, Bram said. I've said nothing because it was not my place, and because no alpha before him ever gave me a reason to speak. He looked at Marcus. You've given me a reason. Gareth looked at Bram for a long moment. Then he looked at the table. He was very old and very tired, and Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the man. Saw for a moment, not the rigid traditionalist he had sometimes taken Gareth for, but someone who had believed in a system for a very long time, and was now, slowly and with difficulty, beginning to wonder if the system had been wrong. We will need to think carefully, Gareth said finally, about what comes next, about what the Pack's authority structure looks like without the Crown's bond, about the legal and ceremonial implications. He looked up. This is not a simple matter. No, Marcus agreed. It isn't, but I have no intention of abandoning the hard work. I would like your help with it, Gareth, all 5 of you, if you're willing. The meeting ended without resolution, but without rupture, which was, under the circumstances, a significant achievement. Marcus walked out into the corridor feeling a specific kind of tiredness, not the tiredness of defeat, but the tiredness of someone who has done something large and real and is now fully feeling the weight of it. He walked toward the eastern section of the settlement. He needed to eat. He should find Owen and check on the border report. He should respond to 3 written messages that were waiting on his desk. He walked to the animal pen instead. Lena was there. She looked up when he arrived, and she looked at him for a moment with the steady attention she always gave him, and then her eyes moved over his face with a care that was different from evaluation. It was the kind of looking that checks to see if something is all right. He was very tired. He did not try to hide this. It went the way it went, he said. We'll see what comes of it. She sat down across from him on a hay bale and looked at him with an expression that was entirely matter-of-fact, entirely without pity, entirely present. The evening light was coming sideways again, the gold version. The animals moved around her. He put his hand in his pocket and touched the small stone. The pack is going to be fine, he said, and he knew it was true when he said it. It's going to be difficult for a while. But it's going to be fine. She tilted her head slightly. He was learning to read these tilts. This one meant, I know. He breathed out. For the first time all day, the weight in his chest settled somewhere he could manage it. Thank you, he said. He was not entirely sure what he was thanking her for. Everything, perhaps. For the stone, for the open hand, for being exactly what she was, completely, and without apology, in a way that had reminded him to do the same. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned back to the animals, picking up a brush and beginning the slow, careful work of evening care. Marcus sat for a while and let the day be finished. 3 days after the ceremony, a man arrived at the Northern Pack's settlement on foot. He was old, not Gareth's kind of old, which was institutional and careful, but a different kind, the kind that comes from time spent outdoors in difficult conditions, where age shows in the skin and the posture, but the eyes stay quick. He had gray hair that had once been red, and he walked with a slight unevenness that suggested an old injury in his left knee. He carried a pack on his back and nothing else. He gave his name at the gate as Edmund, and he said he was not affiliated with any current pack, and when the gate guard asked who had sent him, he said, no one. I came because I heard what happened at the ceremony, and because I have something that belongs to this pack's history. Owen was notified immediately. He met Edmund at the gate himself, evaluated him for risk with the quick efficiency of a man who had been doing this for many years, and determined that the old man was exactly what he appeared to be. Not a threat, not a spy, but something less categorizable and, for that reason, more interesting. He brought him to Marcus. Marcus met him in the small side room off his study, not the formal council chamber. He wanted this to be a conversation, not an audience. Edmund sat down heavily, as though the walk had been long, and set his pack on the floor beside him. He looked at Marcus with those quick, clear eyes, and Marcus looked back, and there was a moment of mutual assessment that reminded Marcus of the first time he had met some of the most important people in his life. "You know about the archives," Edmund said. "Not a question." "Which archives?" Marcus said. "The old ones, the ones that predate the Elders' Hall." He paused. "I used to be a council archivist. 30 years ago, before Gareth's time, I was dismissed." He said this without resentment, factually. "Because I found something in the records, and made the mistake of telling the wrong person what I had found." "What did you find?" Marcus said. Edmund reached into his pack and removed a packet wrapped in oilcloth, the kind used to preserve paper. He set it on the table between them. "Read that," he said. "Then I'll answer questions." Marcus opened the oilcloth carefully. Inside were pages, not original documents he could see, but copies, written in a small, precise hand that was clearly Edmund's. The originals had been transcribed at some point in the past, and then, presumably, the originals had been removed from Edmund's access. He looked at the first page. It took him 40 minutes to read through everything Edmund had brought. Edmund sat quietly across from him and said nothing, watching Marcus's face with patient attention. When Marcus set down the last page, he sat for a moment in silence. "The crown wasn't made to protect the pack," he said. "No," Edmund said. "It was made to prevent the Alpha King from uniting the packs." Edmund nodded once. "The council that created it was not the Northern Pack Council," he said. "It was an external alliance. 4 territories that were afraid of what would happen if the Northern Pack's Alpha King was ever fully bonded, not to the crown, but to his own people, in the way that creates real loyalty. Not compliance, loyalty. They understood that an Alpha King who genuinely loved his pack, and was genuinely loved in return, was more powerful than any crown could make a man, because you cannot defeat love by threatening territory. You can only defeat it by making the person stop feeling it. And so they built a tool to make the Alpha King stop feeling it," Marcus said. "They built a tool, and then they gave it to the Northern Pack as a gift," Edmund said. "They told the Founding Elders it was a blessing, and the Founding Elders, who were facing real threats, and who trusted the gift, because it came with good arguments, used it." Marcus looked at the pages. He thought about his father. He thought about the Alpha King 2 generations back, who had been compelled to distance himself from his mate. He thought about the orphaned boy who had been sent away. "The Alpha Kings who were born with a strong enough bond to reject the crown," Marcus said slowly, "were killed before morning," Edmund said, "without exception. In every case, the death was attributed to illness or accident." He looked at Marcus with those steady eyes. "You are the first one who survived the night." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Why did I survive?" Edmund opened his mouth, hesitated, and then said something that Marcus had not expected. "I don't know for certain. But the documents suggest that the crown's effect diminishes when the Alpha King forms a genuine bond before the ceremony, not after. If the love exists first, the crown cannot reshape it, because there is nothing to reshape." He paused. "It can only work on empty space." The room was very quiet. Marcus thought about Lena, about the forest, about the 5 mornings he had walked to the hollow between the roots. "You came here now," Marcus said, "not before the ceremony. Why?" Edmund looked at him with something that was not quite an apology, but was close to one. "I heard you refuse the crown," he said. "I have been waiting for 30 years to bring these documents to someone who had a reason to believe them. Someone who had already made a choice that proved they understood." He paused. "I could not bring them before the ceremony. No Alpha would have believed them beforehand. The pull toward the crown is too strong, the tradition too entrenched. I needed the man who had already decided." Marcus looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Will you stay? There is a great deal of work ahead, and I need people who understand the history." Edmund looked surprised, genuinely surprised, as though this was not something he had considered. "You want me to stay? You spent 30 years with knowledge that no one would listen to," Marcus said. "That seems like a waste of someone who took the trouble to copy all of this down." He gestured at the documents. "Your archive skills are also probably still intact." Edmund was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression that was too old and too private to be named easily. But Marcus recognized it. The look of someone who has been waiting to be useful for a very long time. "Yes," Edmund said. "I'll stay." Marcus went to Owen that evening with the documents. Owen read them. He was quiet for a long time afterward. Then he looked at Marcus and said, "If this is accurate, then the external council that created the crown may still exist in some form." "Yes," Marcus said, "which means they will know what happened at the ceremony." "Yes, and they may act on it." "Probably," Marcus said. "Which is why I need the eastern boundary fully covered, the 3 Allied agreements reinforced in writing by end of week, and a private communication sent to Grant and Cora, with enough of this information to help them understand what we may be facing." He paused, but carefully. "This information is going to change how people think about their own histories. We need to be thoughtful about how we release it and when." Owen nodded. He looked like a man who had already been working hard, and had just been given more to do, and who was going to do it anyway, because that was simply who he was. "Understood," he said. Marcus walked back from the meeting with Owen through the settlement, and the evening was cold and clear. The stars were beginning as they always began, tentatively at first, 1 or 2, and then more, as though they were encouraging each other. He walked the boundary as he often did, and he thought. The work ahead was significant. The information Edmund had brought changed the shape of the challenge in important ways. It meant the Crown's history needed to be fully investigated and publicly accounted for, which would be painful and complicated, and would require the Elders' participation, willing or not. It meant that external threats were real, and needed real preparation. It meant that the Northern Pact's relationship with the Crown ceremony tradition needed to be formally and permanently resolved. None of this was simple. None of it was fast. But Marcus had never expected important things to be simple or fast. He had only ever expected to do the work that was in front of him, as well as he could, with as much honesty and care as he could bring to it. This was still what was in front of him. The work was just larger now, and the stakes were clearer. He reached the northern corner of the boundary and stopped. He reached into his pocket and took out the small stone. He turned it over in his fingers. The little scratched wolf was almost invisible in the dark, but he knew it was there. He thought about what Edmund had said, about the Crown working only on empty space, about love that exists before the attempt to reshape it, and how that love becomes the thing the reshaping cannot touch. He thought about 5 mornings in the forest, and a child who had reminded him of the difference between power and the reasons for having it. He put the stone back in his pocket. He turned and walked back toward the settlement, and the lights of it were warm in the dark, and the wind was cold and clean from the east, and Kale moved through him like a river that knows exactly where it is going. Lena said his name on a Thursday morning in the first week of spring. The winter had been the most demanding of Marcus's leadership, not in terms of physical threat, though there had been enough of that, but in terms of the sustained, complex work of rebuilding something from the inside out. The Elders' Council had fractured and reformed. Gareth had spent 6 weeks refusing to participate in any council session, then had appeared one morning in Marcus's study, and sat down and said, with the dignified discomfort of a very proud man conceding something important, "I want to understand what the documents mean." Marcus had spent 4 hours with him going through Edmund's materials, and Gareth had left looking older and quieter, and had never again argued for the crown. Petra had become, unexpectedly, one of Marcus's most useful advisors. She had a sharp and systematic mind that was very good at the kind of work they needed, reviewing the old ceremonial laws to determine which ones had been shaped by the crown tradition and which ones could stand independent of it, drafting revised governance documents, communicating with the Allied territories in language that was honest about what had happened without being destabilizing. She worked with a precision and energy that Marcus found genuinely admirable. Edmund had settled into a small room in the archive building and had spent the winter doing what he had clearly been wanting to do for 30 years, organizing the Pact's historical record with full transparency. He had found 3 other documents that had been buried or misfiled, and each one added texture to the history that Marcus was slowly bringing into the open. He was also, unexpectedly, very good with the younger Pact members who sometimes came to the archive out of curiosity, and could explain complicated histories in ways that were accessible without being simplified. Cora had come back in midwinter, alone, without her delegation. She had spent 4 days in the settlement talking to Marcus and Petra and Edmund and, on the last day, Owen. She left having signed an updated mutual agreement that Marcus considered the most honestly constructed interpact document he had seen in his time as a leader. Before she left, she had shaken his hand and said, "I've told my pack what's happening here. Most of them think you're foolish. Some of them think you're remarkable. I think both things might be true. That seems accurate, Marcus had said. Conrad's territory had made one move along the eastern boundary in early winter. Not an invasion, but a deliberate probe, testing response time and patrol coverage. Owen had handled it with exactly the right combination of firm presence and no escalation. The probe had not been repeated. Conrad himself had sent a written message 2 months later that was not quite an apology, and not quite an acknowledgement, but was, read carefully, the beginning of a conversation. Marcus had written back. The Grey Flank territory, whose patrol had been spotted along the boundary the morning after the ceremony, turned out to be the most interesting development of the winter. Their alpha, a woman named Vera, who had led her pack for 12 years and who was known in the Eastern Territories as exceptionally shrewd, had sent a quiet envoy in the second month of winter with a question. The question was, what was Marcus actually trying to build? Not threatening, not demanding, genuinely asking. Marcus had written back a long, careful answer. Vera had written a longer one back. They had been in correspondence ever since, and something was developing between the two territories that Marcus could not yet name, but that felt, to his usually reliable instincts, like the early stages of something significant. All of this was the winter. The pack had moved through it and come out the other side intact, and in some ways more solid than before. Not the solidity of compliance, which the Crown had always produced, but the solidity of choice, which was harder to manufacture but, once present, more durable. And Lena. Lena had continued in her way through all of it, as though the political turbulence of the pack's winter was a weather system that moved around her without affecting the fundamental quality of her presence. She continued her work with the animals. She continued her visits to the forest, where the silver pup, who had grown considerably and was now more of a young wolf than a pup, gangly and enthusiastic and deeply attached to her, met her at the edge of the trees every morning. She continued to eat in the common kitchen, sleep in her small room, help where help was needed, and move through the settlement in her particular way, present, contained, unreachable in the specific way that is not distance but is its own kind of sovereignty. Marcus had begun formally working toward adopting her into his household in the second month of winter. This was, as he had expected, a complicated administrative process. The pack had clear protocols for the adoption of unaffiliated children into households, but adopting into the Alpha's personal household was without precedent, and several of the protocols needed to be interpreted and extended. Petra had helped him work through it, with the same systematic precision she brought to everything. The formal recognition had come through in early spring. Lena had been informed of it by the household coordinator, who had explained carefully what it meant, that she now had a permanent family designation, that she would be educated in the formal pack school, alongside other children of her age, that she had legal standing as a member of the Alpha's household with all the protections that entailed. The coordinator had reported back that Lena had listened to the entire explanation with her usual careful attention, and at the end had nodded once, and then had gone back to feeding the animals. Marcus had received this report and had felt something he did not try to examine too closely. Just warmth. Simple, uncomplicated warmth. On the Thursday morning of the first week of spring, Marcus was in the small courtyard behind the eastern building, working with Owen on a revised patrol schedule. The spring weather had arrived the way it usually did in the north, hesitantly, with the cold still present but something new in the air, a particular quality of light, and a particular smell in the mud and the grass that said the season was changing. He and Owen were standing over the map he had spread on the outdoor table, weighted at its corners with stones, and discussing the southern boundary rotation. The young wolf appeared first. He came loping around the corner of the building in the enthusiastic, slightly uncoordinated way of a young animal that has not entirely worked out how its legs relate to its intentions, and he made directly for Marcus, as he always did now. He had decided several months ago that Marcus was, after Lena, the most important person in his world, and he expressed this opinion physically, and often. Marcus reached down and put a hand on the wolf's head without looking up from the map, and the young wolf leaned into him. Owen, to his credit, did not stop talking about the patrol schedule. He had long since accepted that this young wolf appeared frequently in Marcus's vicinity and behaved as though Marcus belonged to him. Then Marcus heard her. He heard her footsteps first. He could pick them out from all the other sounds of the settlement, quick and light, the particular rhythm of a child who walks with purpose. She came around the same corner the wolf had come from, and she was moving faster than usual, which he noticed, because she did not typically hurry. Owen stopped talking. Lena came into the courtyard, looked at Marcus, and then at Owen, and then back at Marcus. She had something in her hand, a twisted root she had found somewhere, shaped roughly like a question mark, which she had been showing to various animals as though seeking their opinion of it. She set it on the ground. She opened her mouth. Everything in Marcus went still. "Marcus," she said. The word was not perfect. It had the careful, slightly effortful quality of something that has not been used for a long time, and needs to find its way back into the air. Her voice was lighter than he would have guessed, clear and young, with the particular timbre of a child who is between one age and the next. But it was his name, clear and real, in the cold spring air. Cale erupted inside him. It was nothing like the controlled, deliberate movement his wolf had made throughout the winter. This was full, and immediate, and unstoppable. Not a howl, not a threat, but the most complete and unconditional thing Marcus had ever felt his wolf do. Cale's joy was so total that it moved through Marcus's entire body, and he had to breathe deliberately to stay where he was, because what every part of him wanted to do was cross the courtyard and pick her up. He did not move. He understood, from everything he had learned about her, that she needed to be the one to decide how close. He looked at her. His face was exactly what it was. He did not try to manage it or control it for her benefit, because she had never needed him to perform anything, and never asked for anything she hadn't meant to ask for. "Hi, Lena," he said. She looked at him for a moment with those steady eyes, and then she came across the courtyard and put her hand in his. Her hand was small and cold, and she held his with the matter-of-fact firmness of someone who has decided to do something, and is doing it without making a production of it. He closed his hand around hers, carefully, without pressure. Owen had taken 3 very quiet steps back, and was studying the patrol map with great intensity, which was, Marcus thought, exactly the right response. The young wolf pressed himself against Lena's leg. She looked down at him, and then back up at Marcus. "Good morning," Marcus said. She squeezed his hand once, short and definitive. Then she let go, picked up the root from the ground, and looked at it, and looked at him, as though asking his opinion of it. "It looks like a question," he said. She turned it over in her hand, considered this, and gave the small tilt of her head that meant yes, that seems right. She stood there beside him for a while in the spring morning, in the courtyard of the settlement she now formally belonged to, with the wolf pressing against her leg, and the cold air moving, and the light coming clear and clean over the building tops. Marcus breathed in. He breathed out. He thought, this is what I kept. Not power, not territory, not the weight of 4 generations of tradition pressing down on him with the certainty of something that cannot be questioned. He had kept his own judgment. He had kept the right to decide what mattered. He had kept the space inside himself where something real could happen, something that was not shaped or managed or reduced to strategic value, but was simply true. He thought about the crown on the altar. He thought about the moment he had held it in his hands and felt its weight, its real weight, not the metal, but the accumulated pressure of what it would have done to him, and he thought about setting it back down, and he felt, for the 10th or the 100th time, the absolute rightness of that moment. He looked at Lena, who was now attempting to convince the young wolf to look at the root by holding it in front of his nose, and who was managing this with such complete seriousness that it was clear she genuinely wanted his opinion. Cale was warm and steady inside him, not triumphant, just there, the way a fire is there, constant and present and sufficient. Owen came back to the map eventually, and they finished the patrol schedule. Lena stayed in the courtyard through most of it, first with the root and the wolf, and then, when she had apparently concluded her investigation, simply sitting on the low wall at the courtyard's edge, with her feet dangling, and her face turned up toward the thin spring sunlight. When the meeting was done and Owen had gone, Marcus rolled up the map and stood in the quiet courtyard. Lena was still on the wall. The young wolf was lying at her feet, having given up on his legs for the moment. "I need to go inside and work," Marcus said. She looked at him. "Are you going to the forest this morning?" She shook her head. "Not today." She patted the wall beside her. He sat on the wall. He was the alpha king of the northern pack, and he had a full day of work ahead of him, and he was sitting on a low wall in a spring courtyard, next to a small girl who had just spoken his name for the first time, and who was now apparently content to sit in the sun for a while. He sat in the sun too. The spring light was still thin and pale, but it had warmth in it that the winter light had not, and he could feel it on his face. The settlement moved around them, sounds of work and conversation, the smell of bread from the kitchen, the distant voice of Owen issuing instructions to someone. All the ordinary sounds of a place that was functioning, moving, alive. He thought about what came next. There was much that came next. The ongoing conversations with Vera about the interterritory project they were slowly building together, the completion of Edmund's archival project, the review of the ceremonial laws with Petra, the sustained attention to the eastern boundary, the work of simply leading this pack through an ordinary spring after a very difficult winter. All of it was real and significant, and his. He would do all of it. But right now he was on the wall, and the sun was on his face, and Lena was beside him, and her small foot was tapping the stone in a small, slow rhythm that she was not aware she was making, and the young wolf was asleep, and Cale was warm and steady and at peace. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He breathed in pine and cold and mud and the thin new warmth of spring. He breathed out. He thought of a small drawing in the dirt the night before the ceremony, a wolf running away from a door toward an open field. He thought of the person who had drawn it, and the complete and unsentimental understanding with which she had looked at him when she finished, as though she already knew the ending and was simply giving him time to catch up. He opened his eyes. The young wolf was awake again and looking at the sky with the alert interest of a creature that has seen something move in the branches above. Lena was watching him. When Marcus looked at her, she looked back, and her face was exactly what it always was, present and still and real, and in it he saw not the end of anything, but the beginning of something that had no ceiling. He thought, this is the field. Not the door, not the crown, not the old authority that pressed down from all sides and promised permanence in exchange for what it quietly took. This courtyard in the thin spring sun, this settlement moving around him full of people who had chosen to stay because they had been given a reason to choose. This child beside him, learning how to let her voice back into the world one word at a time. This wolf, settled in his chest, like a fire with good coals. This was the field. This was what his wolf had known. From the first morning in the forest, from the first moment it had gone completely still in the presence of a small girl, who asked for nothing, and gave everything, just by being exactly what she was. Lena said something. It was not a full sentence. It was just a word. Not his name this time, but a new one, the first new one, spoken in the same careful, effortful, real way as the first, son. Marcus looked up at the sky. Yes, he said. She tilted her face up too, and they sat there for a while in the spring morning, the two of them and the young wolf, and the ordinary beautiful sound of a pack going about its day, and neither of them needed to say anything more than that. The story did not end here, because real things do not end. They continue forward into all the days that follow, carrying everything that made them what they were. The council work continued, and the border negotiations, and the long, careful building of something new, in a place where something old had stood for a very long time. Spring moved into summer, and Lena's voice came back slowly, one word at a time, and each new word arrived in Marcus's hearing with the same quality as the first, careful and clear, and entirely her own. The young wolf grew into a full wolf that winter, silver-gray and fast and deeply devoted to two people who did not entirely agree on the best route through the forest, but who always found their way to the same clearing in the end. Edmund finished the archive project and started a second one, and wrote something himself for the first time in 30 years, a history of the pack that told the truth about the crown, and about the people who had been shaped by it, and what it had cost them, and what it had cost the pack. Gareth read it without speaking for a long time, and then he said to Edmund, very quietly, that it was well written. Marcus led the northern pack into a second year without the crown's bond, and the pack did not fall apart, and the territory did not collapse, and the rival packs who had been waiting for weakness found none to use. What they found instead was something less familiar and more difficult to counter. A pack that chose, every day, to be where it was. A leader who made decisions from his own full judgment, without the numbing comfort of a bond that had made the hard things easier by making the human things smaller. It was not always easy. Some of it was very hard, but Marcus had never expected the right things to be easy. He had only expected them to be worth it. On the last morning of that second spring, Marcus was at the edge of the settlement, looking out at the tree line, the way he had looked at it on the night before the ceremony, 2 years ago. The sky was very blue. The forest was green and full and loud with birds. The settlement behind him was waking up, the first smells of morning, the first voices, the particular rhythm of a day beginning. He felt two things arrive beside him, the warmth of a wolf's body against his left leg, and the small weight of a hand slipping into his right. He looked down. Lena looked up. "Morning," she said, clear and easy, the way she had said every word since the words started coming back. Not perfect, but completely hers. "Good morning," Marcus said. They stood together and looked at the forest, and the sun came over the trees in the way it always did, clean and unhurried, and without any particular interest in whether anyone was ready for it. Cale was still inside him, steady and warm and at peace. Not finished. A wolf is never finished, any more than a river is finished, but deeply, truly, completely where it wanted to be. Marcus held her hand. She held his. The young wolf pressed against them both. And the day began.